Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 817 podcast. I feel like this is a podcast that we have been building towards for like 6 months now.
Yeah.
The mayoral and city council elections, the runoffs are finally done, and we have the results. So we're excited to have Dr. Emily Farris come back on to talk with us about how she sees the results potentially changing, maybe not really changing the landscape of Fort Worth, but we've got a ton to dive into. But before we do that, just want to run through real quick what the runoff results were. Maddie Parker is the new mayor of Fort Worth with 53.17% of the votes. Honestly, Deborah kept this closer than I expected it to.
Yeah.
So it was a close race, still only about a 6,000 vote difference. But Maddie Parker is won mayor. City Council District 6 by like less than 200 votes. Jared Williams overthrows Jungus Jordan, the incumbent. Goodbye, Jungus. City Council District 7, Leonard Firestone got almost 56% of the votes. He beat out Zeb Pent, even though Zeb won the original vote. In District 8, by like 400 or 500 votes, Chris Nettles took out Kelly Allen Gray, the incumbent, with 52%. And in District 9, Elizabeth Beck got about 62% of the vote, which it's worth commenting on Fernando Peralta going from, I think, 800 votes to a couple thousand, 2,500. So honestly was a closer race than people may have expected. But Elizabeth Beck, City Council District 9. And now we've got Emily on it, and we're excited to dive right in.
Yes, I woke up thinking I knew. Actually, you know what? I didn't even wake up. I did roll over in the middle of the night and look at Twitter and see that the results had changed in the middle of the night. So I woke up, I went to bed kind of feeling like, all right, not much change, like a few maybe people, but woke up feeling a little bit different. So just been processing what all this means.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that a lot of the questions from Twitter, I think, are pretty similar to what we have been thinking about and processing through today. So I feel like those will be a like good thing to go off of. And then just, anything else that you found interesting or want to bring up, we'd love to talk about also.
Yeah. And I want to hear your thoughts too. So maybe, don't let me talk the whole time about all of it, because I'm kind of curious what, y'all think about all this too, as people paying lots of attention, obviously, as well.
What's your current reaction of? I know you've been in the report, you've been in the Star Telegram, kind of saying kind of the status quo. Is that kind of how you feel, like still with the Jared news, or where are you kind of processing now?
Yeah, maybe status quo with asterisk mark, like news to come. I think one of the things we'll see, we'll find out pretty quickly if we are status quo or if we have some folks willing to kind of, I spent the day out on the lake, so rock the boat. Because we have redistricting coming up, we'll have a budget, and we'll have obviously via Tatiana Jefferson, the trial for her death. And those will be, all three of those kind of big moments that'll really let us see whether we should put that asterisk or not on status quo. I will say that, like, for me, as a political scientist who obviously has political opinions of myself and my own preferences for politics, one of the things that I've been in the media ever since I got to Fort Worth and wrote an op-ed back in 2019 about was just the turnout rates in Fort Worth were just so abysmal, like worst in the country abysmal. And this one, if I had to put like what, something changed, it's really turnout change, not necessarily maybe who we ended up with, but like turnout really changed. And so yeah, I guess that's where I'm waking up. It's kind of trying to process, where are we? We'll see. But also, like, why did Fort Worth decide this election was the one to care about? As a political scientist, I'm really excited for that, obviously, but I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I've kind of been thinking over the last couple of days, like obviously Maddie spent $2 million, even Deborah spent over $600K. And like, I started to get this feeling of, I wonder if that's going to backfire towards Maddie just because so much interest is being generated that, unintentionally that's going to get people voting who they might not have been targeting. But then even thinking about like the city council runoffs too, and how that might affect turnout. And I was kind of surprised to see that between the 4 districts that had runoffs, that it equaled about 50% of turnout. And so the 4 districts that didn't have runoffs were about the same. I was kind of expecting to see a little bit more of a bump in the districts that had something else to vote for and were getting more mailers and flyers. But I feel like that didn't necessarily happen. But 14% for Fort Worth is a win, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, right? It's not, we shouldn't be throwing ourselves a party unless it's to register more voters. But I was looking back at the numbers to like prep to talk to you guys about what 2019 looked like. And, Price in 2019 had about, I'm rounding, but 22,000 voters total. Like Parker that's the same amount, actually, pretty much the exact same amount that Peoples had in early voting.
Yeah.
So, like, just like the dramatic differences between, and then obviously Parker brought in another 26,000, and we had the day of, and we had mail-in voting. And so, yeah, just a ton of new people turned out to vote. And that's the credit, let me say something nice about everybody. That's the credit to everyone involved, that they all got, a city that has been very reluctantly interested. Now, I think one of the ways they could really show, okay, we're on a momentum, we want to see change, is move the election date. We're never going to get as high as the presidential race, as high as congressional midterm races, unless we put them on those days. A Saturday in June is not the most convenient time, although, we have a longer voting time, which is good, where we can do early and mail, but it needs to be on the same, cycle as presidency and congressional. Now that has ramifications. Obviously, it's going to be a more expensive race. You're going to have to fight for attention. But just on the turnout issue, it's better. But not necessarily throw a party worthy.
Is that something that the council controls, or is that higher up?
No, something the council could decide. Yeah, I'm not sure. If that would be a charter amendment, and so it would have to go before the voters to change. I think so, but some other places have done it in Texas. I think El Paso, I'm pretty sure McAllen. Some other places have changed to be on cycle, and it's more common in other places across the country. They have on cycle local elections, just like we do have on cycle local elections here in Tarrant County. So, for instance, when you vote for sheriff, that's a very local race for the most part. And that's normal. We just did that this last November. And so some of the arguments for like, well, we should keep it off cycle so that we can really focus on Fort Worth. We can keep it nonpartisan. This last election really showed that's not true. Like, this was not, as much as Parker wanted to say this is a nonpartisan race. It was not, nobody thought it was a nonpartisan race who was paying any attention, as well as the idea that we're not going to let national politics influence locally. I mean, the Police Officers Association, pretty disingenuously, if you ask me, made it about defunding the police. That is a national conversation. They brought in all these other cities. So anyways, the answer to your question is yes. I think they could change it if they want. But I think it might have to go to a charter amendment.
Speaking of the Police Officers Association, I feel like that's a good segue to Carlos Flores. And the confusion today of when did Carlos Flores become a Democrat? When did the Texas Democrats start caring about Tarrant County elections? I feel like that has been a whirlwind today of like, wait, what happened here? I don't think that's true.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. I have the voting file, but I've never gone and looked to see what is Flores's history in terms of voting. But on certain votes on the council, he has, stepped out from the conservative kind of block and voted against a few of those. But, Flores, as I said on Twitter, he ran a campaign that was pretty, mildly conservative, at least, and spent thousands of dollars with a political consulting firm that runs pretty much, I can't think of a single Democrat they've ever run. So let's just go ahead and say they're pretty much a conservative consulting firm. And so, he's certainly not like Elizabeth Warren. He's not even a Joe Biden Democrat necessarily.
Was Gina Bivens the other one? What was the other one? Who was the other one who got the majority? Was Gina the other one?
Gina Bivens is the other one that I feel like it sits in a similar camp to Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, maybe both of them are Democrats. And I don't know, maybe there's something to Democratic strategy of wanting, we see this in national politics right now, where like we're having to rely on the whims of like two senators and what those two individuals feel about the filibuster in order to get any politics done. Maybe there's some strategy in that, but certainly this was not like a, suddenly Democrats now control and we're going to see this progressive agenda come forth on the council. I am super skeptical of that. For sure. Yeah. And I mean, Carlos was backed by the Police Officers Association too, right? And so, and he was in 2019 as well.
Yeah. And same with Gina and same with Carlos endorsed Kelly Allen Gray, who was backed by the Police Officers and Firefighters Associations. But I feel like that's kind of one of the bigger stories right now is it's almost like Texas Democrats all of a sudden wanted to set this expectation that Fort Worth was going to start passing all of this like progressive stuff. And I feel like those expectations for people need to be reined in for how this might actually change, if it will at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas Democrats want to win after coming out of the ledge session where they were able to beat back the voting rights. And so they're wanting to say, like, look, if you let voters vote, they vote for us. They're about to go back into special session. So they want to have like a few wins. I mean, politicians claim credit for all kinds of things that they are not actually responsible for. So I don't necessarily blame the Democrats for claiming credit. And the same for the Republican, maybe not the Republican Party, but we saw Greg Abbott, endorse, but also congratulate Mattie Parker for winning mayor. And everyone said, oh, well, Fort Worth is going to remain a Republican, controlled city. And that's the thing. That's why I just am like, what? Let's just stop pretending these are nonpartisan. Yeah. They are not. Obviously, everyone is trying to sort somebody into the box and even maybe claiming some people that don't fit that neatly into the boxes. But yeah, so I kind of pushed back against, you saw on Twitter, some people saying like, oh, we flipped. We see differences. I think largely those are people that are out out of state. So they're just kind of parachuting in and reading an article or two and assuming based on maybe the districts, based on who the people are. But for those of us that actually know the people, it doesn't seem as realistic to think that we've flipped the council.
Well, now that we have Maddie as the winner, what is I guess something you're hopeful for, or if you had a chance to speak with her, what would you kind of like say to her on what you would like to see in her time as mayor?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that I am hopeful for, not just for Parker, but the whole council, is that the average age of council reduced by about 15 years. And so I'm excited for that energy, as a millennial myself, although just for the record, younger than Parker slightly. I'm excited to have somebody that I think is a little more with our generation and younger folks and able to connect. That's not to say that the wisdom of age and the other people who are older, I disrespect that, but I just think that we need full representation. If I was going to talk to Maddie, I think one of the things that I'd want to talk to her right away about would be what her results, what was her assessment of her results? One of the things when I woke up this morning, when I went to bed last night, they didn't have the map on the Tarrant County website is not that great in terms of election results. They didn't have the map yet up of the precincts. But when I woke up and looked at it, it was just so clear to me that not only, maybe a nonpartisan race, there's Republicans, there's Democrats, but there's also just such a clear racial divide in the city. And Maddie Parker really won thanks to white voters. Fort Worth is not a majority white city. And I'd want to ask Maddie, what are you going to do about that? What's your take on that? Why didn't you appeal greater kind of to different voters? Why did Deborah Peoples successfully appeal to kind of a coalition of voters? And where are we going on that? Because that to me, just like in American politics, is not good to have this kind of, just quite frankly, white supremacy in the city. And so how are you going to address that? That's quite a loaded, big question for her. And I have honestly no clue. If somebody asked her directly head on, what do you make of white supremacy in Fort Worth? Does racism exist like that? Republicans today don't want to teach it. They don't want to talk about it. That's something that I would want. Yeah, we need to talk about here.
And I feel Maddie. Yeah, that's something that got me was because I don't feel like Maddie necessarily has an excuse to not be aware of it with her role at T3 and her nonprofit work is to help Black and brown kids get into college. So where are all these families you're helping, these students you're helping? It's not like you don't have access to people who know who you are or the organizations you work for. So I thought it should have been an easy way to, I guess, to have more inclusion as a person running for Fort Worth, which also why I was surprised as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that I'd want to talk to her about would be so in politics, you have the campaign working, and then you have these other organizations also working, right? Like the Police Officers Association, PACs, et cetera, also putting out mailers. So Maddie Parker didn't necessarily put out the mailers that went after Deborah Peoples pretty aggressively and tried to, as I said, disingenuously, period, link her to the defund the police and try to, stir up emotions about that. But they did that for you. And they did that in your name, although their name was on it. Right. But and so what's your, why?
Yeah.
First of all, why do you think that's okay? And then, what do you make of that? Because, she, to her credit, did do a lot of debates and conversations where this came up. And she kind of steered just to say, well, I won't defund the police, but never really kind of addressed the racial, undertones of that message, the nuance of it. I'd want to ask her, why aren't you more more aware and like, what are you going to do? Because something has to be done.
And there's a lot of implication to that with what you mentioned of Aaron Dean's murder trial. Like, this isn't something that she's going to avoid in her time being mayor. It's something that's going to hit her head on. And the couple times that came up in debates or conversations as well, I feel like there's a lot of beating around the bush, which makes sense when you have the Police Officers Association spending a lot of money to support you. But I don't know. I just struggled to see how she's going to handle that whole trial well for especially the Black community in Fort Worth. When, like you said, she was very obviously pro-police, or her name was at least very obviously attacking anybody who would say something like defund the police.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm a white woman, so I'm not going to speak at all on behalf of the Black community or what they expect out of Parker. Mine is just more looking at the demographic, changes, the demographic breakdown in this election, and seeing other cities, have to navigate these issues. And like, police brutality is not just the issue. I mean, obviously a Tatiana Jefferson case is huge and needs, the respect put on the trial and what it means to the city, but it's not new. Like in the Police Officers Association, I don't think she's going to do anything. I struggle to have any optimism there because they, spent so much money. Another example would be, I was looking just right before we got on the call. Again, the city's actually, this is the city's website, not the county's website, is just absurd. Looking at the Police Officers Association and the firefighters, looking at their contributions to District 6 and Jungus. And let me just pull it up. And so I will go through. For folks who maybe don't read city campaign finance files just for fun, candidates have to file a certain number of reports that say, here's who's giving me money. And they have to do it by certain dates. And you can go in and try to follow the money. Sometimes it ends up like that Always Sunny Charlie, like, conspiracy thinking. But here we go. So on the 23rd, the firefighters gave $2,000. On the 29th, the firefighters gave another $5,000. On the 5th, the firefighters gave $10,000. On the 5th, they also gave $5,000. These might be slightly different groups, but another $5,000. Then we have, I want to make sure I get to the big ones, $25,000 from the Police Officers Association on the 13th. And the firefighters gave another $5,000 on the 13th. And on the 19th, we get the realtors involved, which also traditionally has a big influence in local politics. But yeah, so like a $25,000 gift, right? Then you look at his opponent, and his opponent's large. His opponent in that same time period raised $24,930 total. His biggest contribution was I think $2,500 from a couple. And so that's just massive amounts of spending by police, by firefighters, to make sure that they're not going to have what they think of as, what's going on in other cities of mayors and city councils trying to rein in police brutality and try to have some accountability for what's been going on. The spending is just wild to me. So one day, $25,000, write a check, is equal to your opponent's entire spending, or entire campaign contributions for that time period.
That's wild. I hadn't looked at Jared's at all.
Yeah.
I knew some of what Jungus's looked like, but that's crazy.
How big of an influence do you think that District 6 shift makes? If it was Jungus and not Jared What kind of changes do you see happen at city council because of it?
Yeah, well, the Texas Dems couldn't claim that they somehow flipped. So yeah, I mean, it all came down to kind of like, is it a 5-4 or is it, a 4-5, depending on how you put it. So yeah, I think it's a huge change with it. I mean, huge within the realm of possibility of what's capable of the council of actually doing, as well as huge with the like asterisk of like, are these people actually Democrats who are all going to be able to get along? The other thing that really will be interesting to see is like, this is a new council. We have, incumbents who have lost. We have new people coming on. Now, of course, two of those new people being Parker and Michael Crane were both kind of like staff to the current city council. So maybe they know how to do the rules. But it's funny. I have my students do a simulation of city council. They become the city of Camelot. And like just learning the rules is really hard for them. Of like, what's Robert's Rules of Order? When do I get to propose something? How does this budget work? So there's going to be a learning curve for these new elected officials, as well as for this, like, I'm doing air quotes for people who cannot see me, like the Democrats, to figure out, like, do they actually have cohesion on issues to where they're willing to make a block to like oppose, when the city manager puts forth his budget, I don't think Gina and Carlos are going to say no.
Yeah.
Like, and so are you willing to say no and be the losing vote? I don't know. We'll see. So, yes, I think there will be change. Certainly, if they had not won Jungus's district, it would be a different conversation today. But I don't know how much change, really, there's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do y'all think? I want to know what you think. Will this change?
Yeah, I feel like the two incumbents losing is really significant. And like the significance of it being like less than 200 votes for Jared Williams and like maybe 500 votes for Chris Nettles also shouldn't be lost, that like literally like every vote counts in local politics. Yeah, that's where I've kind of been going back and forth today, is because there is Jared Williams and Chris Nettles now, does that give incentive for Flores and Bivens to maybe vote a little bit more progressive from time to time than they had been, where it was always going to be an uphill battle and might as well be on the winning side? And what do they align on? I think that's these next few months, like seeing what do these people align on and what change can happen there is going to be really interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, Bivens should be aware that like a challenger is coming.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we're going to get redistricting. So
right.
Districts are going to look different than they are now. The Latino community has rightfully said we want more representation. And so that's going to be an issue for, however the districts get redesigned as well. But I think for progressives, I am not part of United Fort Worth, so I'm again not going to speak on behalf of them. But like they kind of needed a win. Mm-hmm. They were much more successful than they were in 2019. And again, this is a group that started in 2017, so they're not that old. And for them to be able to rightfully claim credit to, we were able to take two incumbents, who were dramatically outspent us, who had these like forces of like nature, the police here in Fort Worth on their sides. And we were able to run a ground game. And they, to my knowledge, didn't do that with Texas Democrats. They did that with the Working Families Party, with some other activists out of Dallas and other places. But like, that's local. That's not Texas Dems, or national Dems who did that. That's them. But yeah, if I was on the council and lived in a district that I knew might have a challenge, I would be a little more aware of. If I want to keep my seat, I need to maybe be a bit more responsive than in the past.
Something I want to get more understanding of is, how does the adding of 2 seats look like, and when does that happen? And like, what's the worry there or ramifications of that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's all going to come up in redistricting. So we're going to get the census numbers and the new demographics of Fort Worth. There was this debate over the last year, not really a debate, discussion, I guess, over the last year in the council about whether they should do redistricting the way some other places do it, where it's completely independent of the council, like an independent group brings a recommendation to the council, or whether the council themselves should be in charge of it. So all of that's to come, and I don't know the exact timeline for how that's going to go down. I know that it's either going to be the Fort Worth way and done really quick, and we'll have 2 weeks, and they'll be like, "Oh, that happened,"
surprise,
or it's going to be this kind of long, drawn out potential lawsuits involved. And it could go either way. I don't know. And I don't know what that exact timeline is. But it's something we've been talking about. Like, I did a Star T interview like in 2015, I feel, on this question of like, we're adding more seats. Where is it going to go? Especially the question of how are we going to get more Latino representation, which I think we need here in Fort Worth. So this is, that's been an ongoing discussion.
It kind of sounds like from the panel, it also seemed like there was this like far north Fort Worth felt like they wanted representation, like Alliance and like all the business class of that. And that was like, that's where I was like, well, that could be kind of the opposite of representation if that happened.
I feel like this is where when we're trying to figure out like what's going to change, people are asking what's going to change. I feel like this is something that the quote unquote 5 Dems would potentially align on, where if Jungus had won that seat, I guarantee that Alliance would get their own district, easily another conservative white guy on the council. Yeah. No doubt. Like, that's a seat that's going to stay that way forever. But that's where these 5 people, I feel like, maybe could bring some optimism, where we know that we want to see more Latino representation on the council. And so maybe it could be something that could be finessed in a more democratic way. I think independent redistricting is off the table now, but I've also heard rumors that maybe it could be brought back.
Parker didn't commit, at least on panels that I saw, she didn't commit against it or anything. So, I mean,
yeah. So that's where I've kind of been thinking today is maybe, especially the Jared Williams win could have some really positive long-term ramifications, versus if it were Jungus on there, it would be 2 weeks. All of a sudden we would have 2 extra white guys.
Read the report. I mean, yeah, he would just oppose anything. I don't know if they're going to win. I think, and maybe this is me being like, I don't know, pessimistic. Maybe it's me being a bit beaten down over Fort Worth politics over the year. I'm just excited to have somebody who might potentially call out the bullshit, who might not just sit up there and be the vote that, like, maybe the lone vote against it, but actually be like on, up at the meeting saying, no,
yeah,
what you're doing is wrong. And like, we got a question on Twitter about like, is this going to be more like, are we going to see more conflict on the council? And I think some people really like that about Fort Worth, that it's like most everybody gets along. We don't have these like dramatic fights. Everybody at the end of the day can go like have a drink or a dinner with each other. Right. I I can see the appeal of that. I am not somebody who necessarily shies away from conflict myself, so that's not necessarily my approach to a lot of things. But I think there's some benefit in like, and we went back, thinking that what you asked me about Parker of like, what would maybe be my optimism. I would be really optimistic if she like sat down maybe with Deborah Peoples or sat down with some folks who like really opposed her and said, you know what, we're going to make it where you and I meet once a month and you just tell me how awful of a job I'm doing. Like, just like come in. I'm not trying to like win you over or like, co-opt you into what I'm doing, but just like, I want to legit hear where I'm wrong. And I think there's some real benefit to that. And a lot of people over the years has not felt like council listens to them, partly because Carrie Moon and Brian Byrd sat up there on their phones and literally did not listen to them.
Carrie Moon was like the first person to post congratulations to Maddie Parker like right away, and I was like, he's like the biggest troll. I was like, look at him, like he posts, oh, congratulations. It was like the first like early voting, like 36% was completed, and he like posted his tweet, congratulations to Maddie Parker. I was like, Carrie,
well, he blocked me on Twitter because I mentioned that he has a DUI charges against him. So I don't see his tweets anymore because I am blocked. But that's the kind of thing I'm saying, like, if you're an elected official, you should be able to take it. Like, that's why we elect you. We don't elect you to be our friend or to be, like a consensus builder necessarily. Like, I want you to be an effective politician. And sometimes that means like listening to me when I'm not happy with you, when I don't like, So, we haven't talked yet about the like District 7 race, Firestone and Pent. But like, so Firestone won. Firestone, from what I can tell, does not use social media. And I'm just kind of curious, like how are you going to hear from people? Who are you going to be listening to? I think that's actually kind of important to have some conflict because politics is not just about being like nice to each other.
That was an interesting race. I know that's your district. And from the moment that Lee Henderson realized that he was not going to be in the runoff, he called out Zeb Pent, put all his support behind Firestone, and it seemed like everybody came together to not let Zeb Pent win, which is another positive thing for the city. But like you said, Firestone's a little bit more of an unknown. Like, at least with Pent, we saw him
he's like
hitch his wagon.
Multi-millionaire. I think we pretty much know where he's going to be.
Inheritance, by the way. Inheritance.
Yeah. I will say the one credit to Texas Dems is that they did run some mailers in District 7 opposing Pent. And because Pent, for the most part, with the exception of one mailer that I saw on Twitter, I did not receive myself. But with the exception of like one mailer that mentioned, I forget what it said, something about like, I should have looked it up. But hinted at this kind of, Pent came to fame out of the transgender bathroom debate. So it hinted at something about that.
Yeah, I remember that.
But for the most part, at least going into the initial, I almost call it the primary. It wasn't a primary. Going into the initial race, he really didn't run on a culture wars kind of like what he was known for. So yeah, Lee and Firestone hadn't called him out for that either, right? Because the field was maybe so big. I don't know why. And so Henderson was really the first one to call it out. And Texas Dems, the one thing that I was going to say, if they want to claim credit somewhere, they really ran defense against Pent. They ran a couple of mailers that said, this guy is like, here on XYZ social issues, going to be awful. Don't put him on the council. So they were, everyone seemed to come together. Although Pent also increased his turnout too. He didn't win this time around.
So like District 7, I believe, is traditionally the highest turnout district, and it had a really high turnout for this one. Do you think that if
it hadn't been a runoff,
would things have changed for Peoples and Parker?
I was thinking about that myself. Yeah, I think they would have had turnout regardless, but it definitely drove up turnout. And I think probably, would that have been enough? No, because again, this is a district that's majority white, and Parker won with majority white. So I'm not sure. It's not like if. I guess what I'm trying to say, I think there were Democrats who turned out and kind of held their nose and voted for Firestone, and maybe also voted Parker, maybe voted Peoples, who might have just otherwise sat out. So I don't know. It could have gone either way, I guess, but probably did benefit Parker. Yeah. I
was also impressed by how kind of close Peralta kept it to Beck based off of like the first run. He only had 12%. So, I mean, she got 62% of the vote. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, he went from like 800 votes to a few thousand, which is a pretty big uptick, even though the field shrunk by like 10 people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly haven't followed District 9 super closely.
And I was thinking about what Emily was saying about who's going to speak up. I feel like we had Jared on the pod, and he seems like such a nice, like non-confrontational guy based off the conversation. But watching the Nettles Gray debate, I feel like Nettles has like this like stand-up mentality. And then I also feel like Beck does too, which I think maybe can give maybe Jared, the new guy, some also confidence, because Nettles tried to run for mayor in the past. So I feel those two could also be very active in creating the appropriate confrontation in city council.
This feels like a stepping stone for Beck, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we know that she's run for bigger than this before. So I don't know. How does that like usually affect if people are engaged in what they're doing? If this is kind of something that you need to get a win under your belt, maybe run one more time, and then take the launch to state rep or whatnot that she had run for before.
Yeah, I mean, I think Beck wanted to be in politics. Whether, I don't know, like is a state, I like local politics. So to me, the apex of like politics is mayor, not president. I'm unique in that. But yeah, I don't know if the like state house versus city, is one greater than the other. I think ironically she'll be paid more as a city councilor.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier.
Awful. That's another thing, that we spent millions of dollars for people to have a job that pays $29,000 a year. It's just absurd. But yeah, so I don't know if she thinks of it as a stepping stone or not. Obviously, she's had other political ambition previously before this. I think she's a Democrat, right? Like she is the most like clear, actually, I think, Democrat, because Nettles, I think probably is, I'm guessing, pretty conservative on some social issues that she would not be. Yeah. So yeah, I think she's the clear Democrat. Whether she has a greater ambition or not, most politicians do, like, that are city, for the most part, a lot of them do. Whether they like realize or that's capable or not. I mean, like 2 years ago, if we were having this conversation, like we would have been talking about like, what's Carrie Moon going to do next? Right. True. Like where's Carrie Moon's ambition? And he might still have it too. Again, I'm blocked on Twitter, so who knows? He might be running for president already. But he, I think all of them do. I think, there's seats like Kay Granger's seat is going to be really interesting to watch, to think about who might be challenging both on the Democrat and the Republican side there too. Going back to what I said at the top about like just being excited about younger folks in office, I think that's good for both political parties, for all groups involved, because it means we'll have like a deeper bench of like who are we calling on, who's maybe like growing and getting experience and getting to know the community, the issues, so that we have more people. And I think that's very clear that Maddie Parker was that for Republicans, that she had been kind of set up and that's not to discredit her own ambition or her own success. But clearly people had invested in her to be the chosen one. For Democrats, it's a little less clear. Like, could Jared be that?
Yeah.
Could Beck be that? Like, who's going to be the next time? Ramon Romero would be another in the state ledge, in the House. But yeah, so I forget your question, sorry, initially, but I think Beck's a clear Democrat. I don't know where she's going. I honestly didn't pay that much attention to the race because it was not mine. And it seemed kind of, I'm curious how voters did make the distinction between the two, because I didn't pay or wasn't able to do much to make it.
Yeah, I know that people in the Mims camp, who was probably like the most progressive of anybody running, were pretty upset when he endorsed Peralta and jumped on Peralta's team because they saw Peralta as much more moderate, maybe even a little conservative. But yeah, I mean, it seemed like it leaned Beck the whole way by a lot, but
yeah,
Peralta pulling
I
anything was
there's
good.
Probably like, that would have gotten a second Latino on the city council, which for, I think descriptive representation is important. And so, I could see that. I also think, like it's so funny, like more people are involved. That's great. But like we make it so difficult to be involved. Not only like, as I said, the Tarrant County website's difficult to find election results on and to like sort through. The campaign finance stuff is just like impossible to sort through. But like trying to figure out like these nuances, and especially like in the Democratic Party here in Tarrant County, even though they haven't had a ton of success, like there are factions and there are like little groups, and like I don't engage in party politics with either of the two. I've never been to a Tarrant Dem meeting. I've never been to a Tarrant GOP meeting. I probably wouldn't be invited, but I don't know what they are, but it's clear to me that there are some divisions and like, and where Beck fits and all that, I don't know. But yeah, it's hard to figure that stuff out, even for me that like obsessively follows this stuff.
Yeah. Looking at, I think looking at Maddie Parker's, like, I'm interested, like where cause during the Texas Tribune panel, I felt like her and Deborah were really challenged, and she came off a little bit more progressive, or like a little bit more like moving away from the guard. Like her and Deborah agreed on a lot of things. So I guess for me, you talked about, I think you made a tweet about her, maybe already you're like the Kay Granger seat. So I guess if that kind of happened, I guess the problem there is she would have to still kiss the ring to the style of current Republican Party rather than being a software update that made it a little bit more modern and different, which I do think there's this massive potential for like a modern potential. She could go the whole Francis Suarez Miami vibe, or she could like stay Betsy Price. Yeah.
I like the Suarez. That's a deep reach for some listeners who maybe don't follow all that. Yeah. She very carefully, I think you're right, tried to avoid some of these more explosive political conversations. That's why she like really pushed, like, I'm being nonpartisan, right? To where she was like, I forget which one, but one of the debates, she was like, well, I'm not, I haven't paid that much attention to what's going on in the state ledge. Like, that's not going to fly for some Republicans. Like Trump has created a bit of a litmus test of like, where do you stand? Certain issues, critical race theory, right? To be a Republican right now, it feels like you cannot say racism exists in the United States, in your city or wherever. You have to say we have to make our elections more secure, right? We need to make sure we're like, those are just certain lines that like, I feel if you're a Republican, you talk about. And she really tried not to get into that kind of stuff, transgender bathrooms, that kind of stuff. She tried to stay out of that. And I think for the most part, she'll be able to stay out of that as mayor. I already saw she's trying to say, like, this is the summer of kids and I want policies for kids. Like, who doesn't love that, right? Like, that's it's like Betsy, like, okay, maybe I don't know if she bikes or not, but like, let's put her on a bike, like Betsy Price. Like, but if she wants to move up, now, of course, it's interesting because Granger is her former boss.
Yeah.
So would she challenge her former boss? I don't know. Like, Price and Granger, again, talking about like these division within party politics, Price and Granger are clearly on the outs right now. And Granger endorsed Byrd. So maybe she would, but she would have to turn into a bit of a different politician. That's why I think, Price decided not to run. And I'm obviously not Betsy Price. She does not turn to me for advice. If I was Betsy Price, I would retire, enjoy my grandkids, get a lake house, something like that. But it seems like Betsy Price wants to run for something else. Like, I'm never running for anything.
Wow.
So I don't understand that ambition at all. But if Price wants to run for even, if she becomes county judge or something, or if she wants to challenge Granger, I don't know if that's likely. She can't do that as like the nonpartisan mayor of all. And so, Parker would have to change. I think it'd be really interesting. Let's say if Granger decides next, I'm not running this next cycle. Would Parker finish her cycle and move up? Would it be somebody else? Carrie Moon try to go for it? Who else would be there?
I would be in for Maddie Parker versus Brian Byrd 2.0 for Kay Granger's seat, even if it just got us Betsy Price to continue saying in her sort of like mom voice, like, that's not how Brian Byrd really acts. I would be in for that in a couple years.
I'm disappointed in Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then literally the next day he endorsed it, Maddie Parker.
Yeah. I mean, I have no clue what Brian Byrd's ambitions are. Maybe this isn't the last we've heard of him either, or Michael Crane, which seems like Brian Byrd 2.0, right? Who knows?
I do think the question that we kind of started to go into, but like, who is the Maddie Parker for the Democratic Party in Fort Worth? Is that Jared Williams? Is it Elizabeth Beck? Is it I think, like you said, with Chris Nettles, he might fall a little too conservative on some social issues to take up that mantle. But I think that's an interesting conversation that happens over the next couple years of which of these council members is potentially ready to actually win a Democratic mayor seat in Fort Worth. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's likely, Parker is so young. There's potential that her tenure lasts. Like we're talking about this for the next 10 years or something. But I also think it's going to be a challenge. She'll have incumbency. She said in her acceptance speech, her win speech last night, there's nowhere. Her campaign had nowhere to go but up because they started with a 2% name recognition, right? She is no longer going to face that this next cycle. Now, of course, we've pointed out different things that can be real hurdles and real challenges that might upset and, make people sour on her pretty quick. But she's going to have a much smoother path if she wants it to reelection, just because she has name recognition and the incumbency for her for this next time. So it's going to be harder than it was. Deborah Peoples had, people knew she was going to run. And so there wasn't, with the exception of Zeta, right? And it's very clear that for some folks, they're very soured by Ann Zeta running and not deferring kind of to Deborah and understanding whatever was happening there. But yeah, for Democrats, this next one's going to be pretty open because I don't think, again, I'm not on the consultancy pay scale or payroll for Deborah Peoples either. But I wouldn't expect her to run again. Like, that's just, campaigns are really hard. And she just had a really hard one with a runoff. So maybe she would want to, but I don't think she would. So then, who can challenge? It could be that nobody does. Like, we've had that in Fort Worth where nobody challenges and we don't even have an election because there's no challenger. One person's running.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Like, you've won. I don't think that's going to be the case because of the like progress groups like United Fort Worth and others have made. But yeah, who is that? I have no clue. I think there's a lot of people that could be in the running for the more liberal side. But like, if let's just game out, like Parker takes on Granger and somehow like becomes the Granger. Do Republicans try like, or does the police think like, okay, well, let's try Carlos Flores, right? And maybe he becomes our back mayor candidate. That would probably be a pretty good strategy for them. So there's all kinds of like moving pieces and what ifs. There's not a clear, this is like Parker's equivalent, or this is going to be the next person. And it's hard to step out on council and become that. Like, it's nonpartisan. It's mostly like pretty low key. Not a lot of people pay that much attention, right? So it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard with incumbency to find that person.
You mentioned that city council average age dropped about 15 years. Do we know, or what we project, what the average voter age was this time around?
No, unfortunately, Texas is really limited in what they tell us about voters, what kind of voter records we can get. So other states, I could tell you like X% of white people voted for Parker, in another state. I can't tell you that. I have to kind of like assume Fort Worth is a very segregated city. So if this precinct went, it's probably, these kinds of folks. So yeah, we don't know. We do know that in general, like younger people, I think turned out to vote in November in Texas. So it might have been a bit younger as well. But typically these off-cycle elections tend to be older voters, wealthier voters, and more white voters in general for turnout. This probably was pretty different just because of like the historic nature of potentially electing the first African-American mayor. But still probably some of those demographics stayed the same.
I feel like District 6 probably pushed it a little bit different as well. Just to get somebody like Jared.
They found voters in the weeds. Like they went and knocked like lots of doors, lots of new people came out. And I do think like another part of like what will the next race look like is just really hard to know, because we could have two incumbents paired up against each other depending on how redistricting goes. We could have new seats. And so, yeah, we just don't know. District 6 might look different. District 7 for sure is going to look different. I would guess pretty sure that District 7, because it goes all the way from basically Central Market up to Texas Motor Speedways. That's like a 30-minute drive for a city councilor. That's an insane amount of distance. So yeah, we don't know a lot about who the voters were or how they turned out, which also means it's then hard for the city council members to know, like, who am I accountable to? What do people want? And that's why I think the city councilors who are willing to go on social media, who are willing to maybe sit down with people who oppose them and aren't just willing to sit and talk to the people who paid for them, right? Because that's what's happened in the past. I hope that's at least one of the lessons out of this race.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other final thoughts or things that you wanted to hear from us, or things that you've seen that you've noticed today that felt different or that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a great ending point because it's the kind of like pedantic, like nerdy in the weeds stuff, but like all the like hype, like how much change, the asterisks we put on it at the beginning, all of that. There's no talk about David Cook changing. Yeah. And like, if you don't know that name, David Cook, like you don't know the person who like has the real power with the city manager. And so until like that, some of the bureaucrats who are really running the city, they retire, we get some shifts. I don't think we're going to get that much change. And I just think that's so important for voters to know, because like, let's say what's coming up with the, not just the trial that's going to be very important, but also this ongoing question of, are we going to get a civilian oversight board?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's been now 2 years that they've been like supposed to have done that. And it doesn't seem like Parker really wants to do that. And her answer has always been, well, we're going to lean on the new police oversight person we hired. I'm going to lean on the police chief, right? Like I'm going to go to bureaucrats to listen. And so until we get some change on that, or voters like, maybe start pushing for like, we got to get change. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's going to be that much. And that's, again, we just make it really hard on voters to understand what's the system, who's in charge, and to follow. Okay, 2 years ago we had race, recommendations that came to the council, 100% got accepted. We're still trying to figure out what those are. Like that's a long time to follow something. People don't have that attention span. They want change much quicker. They want to know, where do I go to? And we just don't have the system that is set up to do that.
Yeah, I think let's spend a few minutes and talk about David Cook. He makes more money than the entire city council combined. I believe
probably more than the three of us combined. Likely, no offense, unless y'all are sitting on some.
Nope. He is the Wizard of Oz. Like very.
Well, he is and he's not. He's up there, right? So he's not behind a curtain. He's sitting right there next to the mayor and the budget. So like, if you're somebody who's listening and you care about Fort Worth, budgets are moral documents for the city to tell you what our values are in action. David Cook's the person with his city staff who compiles that and says, here's where we're spending new money. Here's where we're going to, and he works with the council to do that. And the mayor is just one person on the council, although has like this symbolic title, obviously, and some extra powers. But that's a great place. Like he'll host his staff. There will be a few budget meetings probably over the next month or so. That's going to get turnout of like 3 or 4 people. Nobody's going to turn out for that. The budget is a huge document that's very complex to read. It's not impossible, so I don't want to scare people away from doing that. But it's not like the most accessible. It's not like you're not going to get like a podcast, true crime of budget podcast. But like that's places where people can really go and have an impact. And city councilors are going to notice too. Like if you're the person that shows up to a budget meeting, okay, all right, I'll take a meeting for you. I might put you on a commission or something like that. So yeah, David Cook has a lot of power to do things like set the budget. How much are we going to spend? Where are we going to spend it? And that's a moral document. And
then that budget is voted on by the city council. And it's generally not like an exciting affair. Like there's usually not a ton of debate around it. But a lot of our money right now goes to the police. And even I was so mad. The Star Telegram's editorial board, I need to stop reading those articles. They make me so mad. They said that the number one issue facing Fort Worth right now is crime, and tried to say that gangs are the number one thing that Fort Worth that Maddie Parker needs to worry about now that she's mayor. And
that's all that's in the paper. Always. Yeah,
but it's just like this never ending cycle.
Can you imagine Maddie Parker? Like, what is Maddie Parker going to do on the streets? Like Fort Worth, gangs. The Star T editorial, makes it hard, I think, on their reporters who do good work to get things out. Cynthia Allen, I think, is the most egregious, and she mostly stays out of local politics for the most part. But yeah, the oversight, the police oversight, that again, one of these recommendations that came out of dealing with issues of race a few years ago and the committee they put together. Like, that could be something where we could have more funding, where we could have more staff involved, more oversight, that the police is probably going to oppose, although they might be okay with some of it. I'm not sure. But that could be something that citizens could very clearly advocate for, is we want to have funding. And the key, I think, is maybe not to look at, well, what did Fort Worth do last year? Although you can go find that numbers too, but to look at, okay, what are some cities that Fort Worth likes to think that we're comparable to? And let's go look at their budgets. Let's go see Dallas. Let's go see Fort Worth hates to compare itself to Dallas. Okay, so maybe another city. Maddie Parker has said, I want to try to lure in companies from places like Seattle or others. Okay, well, if you look at Seattle's budget, I'm going to guess they spend a heck of a lot more on transportation. So if we want to lure companies, which, we can get it again, you can get into the weeds about like, what's the corporate tax rate and where is that going in Fort Worth? And most people would rather put on that true crime podcast. But it matters. And you can compare budgets and really learn, I think, that way, where Fort Worth should be. And most people don't want to do that. Like that does not sound like a sexy time for them. I can understand that. I do not blame voters for not wanting to get into the weeds for that. But that is where a lot of, like, politics does not end at elections. Like, you have to do the work to keep your folks accountable. And like, city managers are good for some expertise, but they're not necessarily good for listening to voters. So you have to do the works of showing up at budget meetings, that kind of stuff, and seeing where we're at.
And how Fort Worth does our city manager, it's very more embodies like a smaller suburb. Like, is it not really set up like major cities? Is that something that's accurate?
Yeah, a lot of the larger cities, which Fort Worth now is 12th, keep growing. We keep growing, tend to have strong mayor systems. You still have a lot of city staff involved. It's just who's accountable is different. City managers, for the most part, are thought of as being smaller towns, more homogenous towns, where you want, maybe like you can have an expert because there's not as much conflict, which, as we said, in Fort Worth, typically there hasn't been traditionally. The council votes all together. No one's really willing to step out and oppose. So if things change, then maybe that might change too. But for the most part, because the city council themselves are not paid enough. And I get why some people might be hesitant to want to pay politicians more, but you really get what you pay for, and you're going to get a certain kind of person who can't take the job seriously full time unless you pay for them to be able to do that. Their staffs are smaller. The individual city council staffs are smaller. So they have to rely on staff more because they themselves do not have the capacity to do it. And so what ends up happening is that they pretty much they rely on these people. They're my friends. I trust, David Cook's going to tell me what's right for the city. And so we lose some of that accountability that in a city that's larger, that is more diverse, that has a better paid city council staff, a better paid mayor, who then they can rely on their own people, and we can have a little bit more politics and conflict. That's the major difference between the two, and why bigger cities tend to have strong mayors. There's also historical differences. A lot of the larger cities around the East Coast, those have always been partisan. They have a different political history than we have here in Texas as well too. So there's that. But that's something that I don't hear being talked about at all. Should we change to be Houston has a stronger mayor system? Should we be a little bit more like Houston? None of that's been on the table. I think city council, for the most part, has liked having kind of the staff be able to handle all of that, and they don't have to do it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, if I were... You couldn't pay me $20,000 a year to go sit at every city council meeting. Nevertheless, do the work that it takes to go into that. So it is it's totally fair.
I mean, it's just not. You can't. Average folks even like middle class, above, above like wherever our median household income is here in Fort Worth, like just cannot afford that because it is a full-time job. Most of the city councilors, to their credit, treat it as maybe not 100% full-time, but certainly more. In fact, Flores has talked about how he's going to step more into having this be full-time for his stuff. But like, yeah, I could not like pay my bills if I wanted to do that. I would have to quit my job. And that's just like, then I can't live off 20, at least, I mean, I probably could. I went to grad school and managed, but like I'd have to change things in my life. And that's really difficult. And the same for mayor, 29,000, that pay, just like our turnout is some of the worst in the country. And I really do think we had a charter amendment where we could have, where it was on the ballot to increase pay, and voters voted it down. And I think there's just this like, maybe rightfully so, like, I don't want to give politicians my money. Like, I don't want to have to pay for your salary and like you get rich and never listen to me. Okay, well, then you're going to get somebody who either cannot treat this as a full-time job and then you're relying on some unknown staffer to do the work, or you're getting somebody who is independently wealthy and thus can do it because it's like their hobby. Like, those aren't great choices if you actually sat down and thought about it.
Or you just get an office that never responds. Like, I don't know how many times I reached out to Kelly Allen Gray's office and never got a response. So I will be asking Chris Nettles when he calls HEB and when that will be coming into our district, because that was a promise.
Hey,
I had the same problem. Dennis Shingleton, I think, called me back once, and I let it go to voicemail. So maybe that's on me. But I basically adopted Ann Zeta as my city council member and was like, I'm going to message you and hope you have an answer for me about this, and her city staffer, Catherine. So I probably need to call Elizabeth Beck or message her and say, by the way, you don't know this, but you now have to deal with me. Because probably Firestone is not going to listen as well, too. But yeah, I mean, that's not okay. Like, we should be able to contact our elected officials and they listen to us and answer. The county commissioners, I think, are some of the worst. My county commissioner has been in office longer than I've been alive. And from what I know, he does not know how to use a computer. And so anytime you if you want to email or something, like, they're going to print out that email for him because he is not going to read it on a computer. Like, that's the kind of politics you get when you don't pay for people, when you don't let people run or have an interest in running. Now, I'm not saying like somebody should make, I mean, we allow David Cook to make an obscene amount of money. I'm not saying we should make every city council and mayor like make that much, but like, we could tie it to whatever the median household income is in Fort Worth, or we could tie it to like, okay, well, let's look at some comparable cities of who we want to be, and make it that way. But yeah, you get what you paid for, and we paid for basically nothing.
This conversation has given me like a flashback to how our city government might be more comparable to like Pawnee, Indiana from Parks and Rec than Seattle, San Francisco, wherever Fort Worth says it wants to go. And while that was very entertaining,
I think yes, in some ways, but I was also looking when I was trying to dig through campaign finance. You used to be able to run for Fort Worth City Council with like, not an insignificant amount of money, but like $10,000-$20,000. Those days clearly are long gone to where you have to spend a lot of money. And that's going to make, you're then spending, and traditionally here in Fort Worth, it seems we have spent at, I won't name them, but a certain few consulting firms have gotten all the funds. This last cycle, we had funds in Austin, like Illinois coming in and running these campaigns. So it's not, Fort Worth is, I think, having a bit of an identity crisis, or is, some people are wrestling, right? It was very clear between Parker and Peoples that they were wrestling with two different types of identities of what is Fort Worth, the one Fort Worth or the more like status quo, cowboys or whatever it is, cowboys and culture. And I think when you get 12th largest city of Fort Worth, more engaged voters, more money in politics, you're going to get a different kind of like politics going on. And in some ways that's good, maybe being a bit more professional, but in some ways it's also bad. Like I'm probably not going to be able just to like send a DM to a city councilor and get a message. Right. But yeah, yes, I love Leslie Knope. I would love to vote for Leslie Knope. But I think Fort Worth thinks that we're much smaller than we actually are. And that's catching up to us in our politics.
I love getting to talk to her.
Yeah, she's the best.
Thanks a ton for coming back on. And yeah, the turnover's quick. The council gets sworn in pretty quickly. I think it's like 11 days. And then we'll be off and running with this new city council that allegedly is 5-4 Democrat. But I think that from this discussion, you can kind of see that it's a lot more convoluted than that. So thanks a ton for listening. We really hope that you have enjoyed all of the election coverage we've had. We're looking forward to kind of getting back into, Fort Worth politics as they go week to week, instead of having this big shining light that's coming at us down the train tracks for a while. So thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.